Okay, Georgi Dinkov, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me. We'll try not to fall asleep.
Yeah,
right?
I was just saying
tired.
how exhausted I am for waking up extremely early in the morning to talk to somebody on the other side of the planet. We haven't really caught up. Aren't guards and things in DC right now? Like they're staying forever, basically.
They're still there, yeah. I mean, the official version is until March, end of March. But I just don't see like why this arbitrary deadline, right? There's nothing happening at the end of March that I'm aware of, or like you've seen anything written about, or have heard Pete talk about, or Whitney Webb, or anybody. So I think it's just like one of these. They're here temporarily, but guess what? Temporary solutions tend to become permanent, right? So I think for as long as the Biden administration is around, like the guards will stay here. The entire Capitol and like that corridor, like there's a quadrant there, which includes the Capitol Hill, the adjacent buildings, Library of Congress, Supreme Court. Basically, it's surrounded by barbed wire, and it's like the green zone in Baghdad. Wasn't there like a Whitney Webb like a article recently saying that basically that's what DC has become? Like if you've seen the green zone in Baghdad, the heavily fortified center of the city, where basically you have like 4 checkpoints to get inside. You can get shot at with no warning if they even deem you suspicious for any reason, right? It's basically like, and then once you get inside, like the four perimeter checkpoints, then you basically like it's like you're in a free zone, but it's basically it's militarized.
What is you might have already said it, but what's the reason they're telling people they're there, just to protect the Capitol? Is that?
Of course, like the rioters, they're going to return, and they're planning future riots. Of course, but it's never anything concrete. It's just like the Bush administration raising the terror alert to the point of like initially they were giving reasons. They were like Osama would release a new tape, right? Or like al-Zawahiri would release a new tape or a new warning.
Getting younger and younger each tape.
Getting younger and younger, exactly. But like Michael Moore has this in the Fahrenheit 9/11, I think it's called the movie. He said at some point the Bush administration even stopped giving reasons. They just said we're raising a terror alert to orange, or red, orange. It's just at some point people don't even question it. It's like, hold on, are we supposed to have a reason for raising a terror alert? No, they just gave no reason whatsoever. And it's the same thing here. It's like, oh, something bad is going to happen. Well, they're still talking about the right-wing extremists, right? The domestic terrorists. But I have a feeling at some point this is just going to stop. Basically, like people will get used to the fact that there's a military presence in DC and nobody will question it.
Society of the spectacle.
That's right. Everywhere. I think it's not that much different in Europe. I mean, like with all the protests going on, I think the same thing happened in the Netherlands, or is about to happen because there were riots in the Netherlands against the lockdowns. I think Denmark saw some of that. It's not very publicized, but there were riots there too. In France, like was it like, I think you sent an article to Pete from Zero Hedge where basically they were talking how the rioters set the central bank on fire.
Yeah, I never got clarity of actually if they had burned down the bank. I think they just set it on fire quickly, and I couldn't find any follow-up of what actually happened. But I sent it to him. I was like, at least some good news is coming out of the coronavirus. That's right.
But anyways, as a result of these events they're also heavily militarized. Like basically they bring it in the military and I think in most European countries there is no law that prevents the army from policing, unlike the United States. If they want, they will use it immediately. Not that they wouldn't here. I mean, as we can see, if you remember, like the Rodney King riots in LA, they declared basically the place, I think, a war zone or something, and then the Marines were allowed to come in and do whatever they want. So it's like this whole act of preventing the military from acting as a domestic law enforcement agency, it can be stricken down. It can be immediately removed by like an executive order of the president in a matter of seconds. So that law is basically, in my opinion, I don't think it's after seeing how quickly the Marines got involved. I don't think it will stop anybody, or like it's any real prevention on the militarization of society, even though it's touted all the time. But we see what happens. And then of course there's the National Guard, right? In theory, they're supposed to be loyal to the governor and not to the federal government. But then how is the federal government able to mobilize the National Guard? So clearly they have loyalty to the federal government as well. So this whole talk about like, oh, National Guard is separate, like if the governor orders them to not assist federal law enforcement, they'll do whatever the governor says. I don't think that's true. I think this whole idea of like states, I mean, maybe it used to be the case, right? And I think now we may actually start seeing some more increase of like local state power because people have realized that the federal government is completely out of control. Half the country knows that, right? That it's a criminal organization. So now they're going to try to pull some of those rights back at the state level to the state level. Let's see if it happens. I mean, if it does, then I think that would be a legitimate and probably the only way to oppose the federal government is by strengthening the local state governments. Because let's face it, the regular citizen, there's nothing they can do against the federal government.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this is your reality. We're talking about something you're involved in. That's why I keep bringing this subject up. You're in D.C., you have a bunch of military and troops, and so I think people are sometimes confused why we're talking about this. But anyways, to segue into health news.
Yes.
Did you see these Ray Peat interviews, 2017, that finally went live on YouTube?
I noticed that you posted it, so I'm about to watch it. I haven't seen it yet, but is it like a 3-hour interview or something?
The first one is 3 hours. The second one is 4 hours. And so
wow. Is this Brad and Jeremy finally releasing them?
Yeah. So these are long requested. These happened in October of 2000. Man, I'm an idiot. What?
Probably 15 or 16
no,
or something.
2014.
Really?
Yeah, 2014.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, these are really good, and obviously anybody interested in this show, I'm sure, has probably already seen them or is planning on watching them. I'm like probably halfway through the second one. The second one is more physiology and connecting, painting a broad view of the system from what I've watched so far. And then the first one is a lot of origin story of Ray. And yeah, man, thanks to Brad and Georgi for releasing something.
I think they finally, the public anger finally caught up with them, and they decided that it's time because I don't know what they do for a living, but it's definitely not a good publicity to like this whole mess that was created. So I guess they've decided to do what's right.
Well, I know they do commercial. So again, I'm not excusing anything. I'm just as kind of riled up as anybody else, but like, I know they do commercial work, but I was happy to at least see these. It's better something than nothing, I guess. But like a few people commented, it's like so refreshing to see Ray like with his mannerisms and things like that. And it kind of like solidifies it rather than just hearing a voice. And It's not like you couldn't see him talking before these videos because there were the small clips of him. But they're 100% right. I think these ground some of the things when you hear him talking, and it's I think he's a very good public speaker. Also, he talks like he's 77 in these interviews, I think, and he's just super fluid. So, yes. Anyways,
so where are these hosted? BitChute or like on your website or?
No, these are on YouTube.com. If you type in Ray Peat, you should find them instantaneously. And so I have the titles. It's pretty small to me.
Let's see how long they survive.
I would be shocked if they were taken down, but watching them occasionally gave me chills. And one of them, maybe we could watch it real fast. Let me jump to my Twitter because you should be able to hear this. Let's just watch a clip because it is so prescient. Is that the right word? It's so
prescient.
Applicable to this situation right now. This is not mind blowing or something, but it's just crazy. Okay. You can
Fields of research seem broad as well as your endeavors. I've just never been able to describe what you do succinctly. How would you describe yourself?
I've always thought of myself as a painter who couldn't make a profession of portrait painting because I didn't like the way the clients made demands on how I represented them, and that science is just part of the landscape. It isn't what I do as an occupation or profession. It's just something that everyone really has to deal with because it's a major means of indoctrination and control. People say, here's this study that gives this result, therefore you have to do this. And it's really a propaganda and control and manipulation scheme, as well as a byproduct, it has a lot of useful things. And so I found that I could use the techniques and do some useful things, but I don't subscribe to the culture in general. It's a nice idea.
Do you consider yourself a scientist?
No. I think if a critic of opinions about reality could be called a scientist, yeah, then. But I think of myself as mainly a critic rather than a participant in the science culture.
Who knew how right he would be a few years later? That.
Well, the joke here is actually a little bit on him, because he's saying like the propaganda is based on like saying, oh, here's the study has these results. Now it's the other way around. They're not giving you any reason. They're just saying do X. And if you come back and say, hey, by the way, the study says masks don't work, you know what? You're banned. Right?
Yeah, you're right. I didn't think of it that way, but you're totally right. And yeah, don't ask any questions at all. There was somebody sent me a bizarre headline. I think it was like from maybe New York Times or something. And it was like critical thinking is getting us into a mess, or it was something so stupid. It could only have come from like the New York Times. But the headline was like, again, it was ridiculous. But
yeah, I remember that. But I think it was something worse than it was like why you should not question the opinion of experts or something like that. Like when an expert tells you something, why it is not a good idea to question that, because they're saying like it's getting us into a mess. It's like, oh, it's creating all this confusion and we can't get these things done. Well, your things, right? So clearly, if I don't like them, I'm going to question it. And if you think that basically, yeah, there we go, isn't helping in the fight against misinformation. That's exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Don't go down the rabbit hole. Critical thinking, as we're taught to do it, isn't helping the fight against misinformation. Yeah, it's almost too stupid to comment on, but
I think it comes down to this: like somehow they have convinced the public, they've sold the public certainty in an uncertain world, right? So the reality is the exact opposite. Things are always uncertain until, as Ray said, right? Things ideally should never make sense until in the right context they make the right sense, right? Mm-hmm. So that should be what should be indoctrinated into people, saying like, look, it's okay for things not to make sense. We're always changing, always accumulating new information, discarding, other old information, getting new one, right? So until the right moment comes under the right circumstance and the right knowledge, it is okay for things not to make sense. If somebody gets on TV and says, I've solved all of your problems, the only thing that's required is you never question me, right? And you do exactly what I say. I think that should be that is the antithesis, the negation of reality, right? It's basically people selling you certainty when we do live in an uncertain world.
Yeah, I've probably brought this up 10 times, but the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet because you're being had.
That's right. Is this Neil deGrasse
Tyson? He's on Joe Rogan basically saying what that article just said.
Not everyone embraces everything that science does, and some will cherry pick it. You have the science deniers for global warming. You have science deniers with vaccines. You have science deniers with GMOs. Yeah, there's all manner of science denying going on in modern society, and we in a free society, what are you going to do, right? The people can think what they want, but if thinking what they want influences policy, which then affects everybody, then your science denial has consequences to the economic health of the nation. And by the way, it's not only economics, it's the economic health, it's your physical health, because medicine flows through advances in science, as well as our security.
I mean, it's so ridiculous, but I know
this is bizarre. So he's setting up the stage up for exactly what we're saying right now.
Yeah.
Like the moment you start to disagree, you're already affecting him, right? So you're banned, and he's the expert. So, I mean, this is ridiculous. Like, so it's like, okay, we cherry pick. Don't they cherry pick as well? If you show me a scientific position that incorporates all of the available evidence, then I will probably go along with it. I mean, hesitantly, but I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. But if you look at the way the consensus is formed, they do even worse cherry picking, right? So it's like, pick up any discipline in science, any scientific endeavor, and you'll always find there's at least 4 or 5 leading hypotheses, right? One of them is dominant for whatever reason, usually political, right? But then and there's like at least 3 or 4 others that are competing for attention, and there's evidence behind them too, right? But the way this consensus is working now, they're coming to you and saying, no, there are no other 3 or 4 hypotheses, just one, and we've already settled it, right? And that's the way it is. But that, that's just not how science works. Like, the confusion and uncertainty are part of science. If there's no uncertainty, there's no confusion, it's no longer science, it becomes religion. And it's exactly what we're being not sold. What's being forced down our throats right now.
Well said. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but like, it's being sold as this is one thing that everybody agrees on. Like, I think we were talking about this, and somebody left a comment. It's like, if science is so kind of misinformed, how could my smartphone work? And I think that's really common thinking. Like, the technology we have is so incredible. Of course, medical science is right on par with that, and they're so incredibly advanced. And unfortunately, that's just not.
Well, my response would be, okay, your phone works, but the medicine still can't cure cancer 100 years after, and it's getting worse and worse, right? So it's like, and again, if I try to point out studies that science is stagnant, I immediately get like this violent reaction from almost anybody in a position of science. Like, no, it's not true. Well, look at this. There's this physicist, her first name is Sabine. I think she's she's the one who writes about the stagnant situation in physics, especially particle physics. She's basically saying, like,
earthquake right now.
People have been telling fairy tales for at least 50 years. They've invented these imaginary particles mathematically, right? And they keep arguing with each other and publishing these papers, but none of this is testable, and not a single one of these particles have been confirmed to exist. And they keep inventing more and more and more and asking for more money, and now they're asking to build for $40 billion to build an even bigger Hadron Collider, right? And she's like, this is insane. This has nothing to do with reality. Yes, it is very pretty, very sophisticated math, but guess what? Math and reality are not the same thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if you look, there's some articles lately saying that, trying to deny reality, saying like, basically, like, reality is an illusion, right? The only thing that exists is the ideas in our mind. And since mathematics is an idealistic concept, then basically they're saying like, it's just as real as anything else that passes through your consciousness. And we need to fight against that, against this idea that idealism is the only basis for reality.
Yeah, not to keep reading off Ray Peat quotes, but do you recall? Let me try to find it real fast. This was in 2016. He says, when they have hundreds of billions of dollars to spend on their conspiracy, it becomes so pervasive you can hardly call it a conspiracy. It's an alternative reality they're constructing.
Yeah. And it's so advertised and so widely imposed on everybody that at some point, especially if you're glued to your digital device all the time and you follow in the mainstream media, it becomes the reality. It's not an alternative one. It's actually it's the real word that starts to annoy you because it's so confusing and uncertain, right? And this is so easy. Your phone is basically all this digital technology. The ultimate goal is this: to sell you on determinism, on full predictability and control of reality and knowledge of reality, when no such thing can exist. It's just a process, and it's always improving, not always developing. Sometimes there's improvement, sometimes there's regress. But guess what? These are not politically convenient topics to discuss. You can, if you go to your constituents and say, hey, we spent $20 billion to build a large Hadron Collider, and basically the results are nil. Basically confirm what we already knew, right? They're not going to give you the $40 billion that you're asking now to build a bigger one.
Maybe it's a big money laundering situation.
I think it's just about keeping people employed. That's all there is. It's all about employment in the modern state, right? And everything has become a career. Like even janitors now, they actually have special schools for janitors, how to like progress in that field. Can you believe it? There's like a janitorial consulting companies on basically how to land a job with the most stable janitorial contractor. So basically your job is secured for decades in advance. Usually involves working for a company that does cleaning for the federal government, right? Because that's like as long as the federal government is around, you always have a job. So everything has become a career. And of course, any information that threatens that career, the entire field is going to unite behind the effort to crush that idea. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine how much higher the stakes are in things like medicine and nutrition. $1 trillion industries, right? Directly affecting life and health of every person on this planet, at least people that live in society, right? I'm starting to understand why some people just shun society and become monks. I need to go to one of these monasteries and see what's going on there, because I suspect that these people have created their own alternative little worlds and societies there. And they don't want much noise to be raised about this, because we may find out what nice life they're having probably has nothing to do with religion and being a monk, right? They're just being left alone, and they can do whatever they want with their days.
Well, that's what Ray said, something about Mormons being insulated largely from the culture. And so there's probably many different examples of that, but that's how those people benefit by like excluding themselves, or somebody like the Branch Davidians or whatever, even though they were kind of nutty, the Waco people, like that was probably a similar type of situation where they were.
Well, the Amish, the Mennonites, they're the same way, basically. Like, so I guess something similar must have happened, maybe not at that level in scale, because modern technology is pervasive and truly controls the world. But like, these people have this animosity towards modern things, especially technology. So something similar but on a smaller scale must have happened when these communities were being formed for these people to develop and embed it into their culture that basically technology is evil, right? And they're doing it on a religious basis, but there's nothing in the Bible that talks about technology being evil. But it's part of their culture. They don't use electricity. They don't use cars, right? They don't use computers, TVs, none of that. And if you ask us, I have a friend who went to Franklin and Marshall College, which is right in the heart of Amish County country. And basically, like that was like 20 years ago when I was still in college. So when I went to visit him, I had these discussions with Amish, and they're basically saying like, no, it's not part of the Bible, because they're very heavily, very, very pious Christians, right? So you'll think it's coming from the Bible and the faith, but it's not. And they're saying we don't know why and how it started, but it's a core belief of our culture that nothing good will come out of technology. It only enslaves the human spirit. And now, when at the time I thought like, wow, these people are insane, right? But now I'm saying, I'm reminiscing about this conversation and saying, wow, these people know what they're doing.
Might be a way forward here to shut down the live stream, become Amish, live a better life in the future here. So that, do you know this is our 50th episode? That's pretty, somebody mentioned that. That's pretty crazy.
Just me and you, or like with Ray as well?
No, like, I'm sure you and I've done less, but like, but this is the 50th Generative Energy podcast episode, which is pretty crazy.
Congratulations. It's a pretty good number.
Congratulations to you as well. Yeah, man, again, not to get too blushy or anything, but thank you. This has been a fun ride. We used to do these on Patreon, and there would be like 5 or 10 or 20 people that would show up, and if I saw like 20, I'd be like, holy smokes, like that's really good, like on a Friday night or whatever. And so, and then we've been talking for even longer than that. Like we started that first podcast, I think it was 2015. Is that right?
Yeah. Fall of 2015.
Yeah. And then
it was like September, October 2015.
And I got extremely burned out, and then we stopped, and then we kind of reinvigorated things with the live stream. And this has been very fun. And so thank you. Glad we got Ray involved, and he'll be on next week to complete the trio. And we'll talk again about things that nobody wants to hear about.
Well, not nobody wants to hear about. The experts don't want to hear about them.
Okay, so we have 6 user, why do I say user questions? Like watcher? What's the right verbiage there? Anyways, we have 6 excellent questions. Fans. I don't even like fans. I like it. There's something like, or maybe I'm thinking of followers is what I don't like. Groupies. That's like has sexual connotations.
Really?
Yeah, definitely not that one.
Why does it have sexual connotations?
Like if you're a groupie for a band, you sleep with the band.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. I thought it's just like fans who travel, follow they're so infatuated that they travel with the band everywhere.
Maybe individual thinkers that enjoy the presence of us online. Maybe that's a good way to say it.
It's too cumbersome. We got to come up with another one.
I'll come up with some acronym. Okay, so let's get into a few articles, then we'll take a question and we'll bounce them back and forth. Before we get too far, let me just read off some things here. So, Burke A, who's like an OG Ray person, you have won the Tocovit. Thank you to Georgi for supplying these Tocovits. To enter in this week's Tocovit giveaway, go to t.me/DannyRoddy. And then I should have done a new one, but I just go to /DannyRoddy/324, and you can leave a comment on this post that I have right here. And I will choose, like, I'm like scrolling and stopping the scroll and just choosing whoever is there. And then also this t.me, the Telegram, is supposedly uncensorable as of the moment. And so I'm putting a lot of effort to move a lot of content on there. And also, if you go to t.me/DannyRoddy chat, there is a ongoing chat that you can hang out in and ask questions and stuff. Any news on your end, Georgi?
Not really. Basically, waiting for Bulgaria and Taiwan to restart their activities, so we can continue with the scientific studies.
Awesome. Okay, what article did you want to jump into?
Well, I think the most controversial one would be the one that Topical DHT promotes hair growth.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see.
Here we go.
Yeah. I mean, if that doesn't settle it for people, then I don't know what will. That at the very least, the DHT is not the villain that it's being described, because in the study, it's an in vivo study, but I mean, both in vitro and in vivo. Basically a higher than physiological concentration of DHT accelerated hair growth, and only at a very, very high 10 micromole per liter concentration, which is impossible to achieve in the body, even in people with baldness, like we're measuring the scalp. You're not going to get to that concentration. So the one that worked best was 100 nanomoles per liter, which is slightly above the physiological concentration of DHT in most males. Lower concentrations, they didn't have the growth promoting effect, but also they weren't inhibiting growth either. And only the higher concentration, which is 10 to the -6, which is 1 micromole per liter, only at that concentration, basically it started to inhibit hair growth. But if you look at it, it actually wasn't much different from the control group. If you look at the control and you look at the 10 to the -6, look at the last picture, D17, the first and the last column. They're not that different. Or actually, if you look at D14, it's even better. On D14, the control group had lower hair growth than even the super physiological concentration of DHT, which is the last column, right? So I mean, to me, this is a pretty strong nail in the coffin of the theory that androgens are behind the hair loss. I think my personal theory is that they're just it's like the innocent bystander theory, right? I mean, basically, if DHT is the strongest endogenous antagonist to estrogen for males, right? Then you would expect that if estrogen and prolactin and cortisol are behind hair loss, you would expect that DHT levels in the scalp will rise to balance the negative effects on hair growth of these steroids. So there you have it. I mean, I'm not saying try DHT on your scalp, but this is probably the most direct study we have so far that shows that DHT in physiological concentrations is not detrimental to hair growth.
I feel like aldosterone should be included in that conversation, because that's actually one of the more well-studied aspects of so-called androgenic alopecia that they've measured in men and women, and then that's associated with the hypertension, or causes the hypertension. And then didn't Ray?
It's a pro-fibrotic hormone, and in some countries, the spironolactone drug, which is the main aldosterone antagonist in clinical use, it's actually approved for hair loss treatment.
And then that kind of segues into Ray is always talking about vitamin D and calcium for hair loss. Well, those lower PTH and prolactin, but they also, I think by extension, because they lower PTH, lower aldosterone as well. But just to go over this, to maybe sell somebody on the idea, like, so if baldness is caused by lower thyroid function or high stress, the thyroid function is suppressed from many different variables, including the accumulation of PUFA. The testicles don't work very well when thyroid is suppressed. You're going to increase the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals, and the dihydroepiandrosterone, the DHEA, will be metabolized peripherally into androgens. And so if they do a biopsy of skin on the scalp or something, that might explain why there's a couple of papers about higher levels of androgen in skin of those.
Well, since you said, like, basically, if the gonads are not working, which is where most of the DHT is produced, then the body is ramping up the synthesis of DHEA, because it is the precursor to both testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. So it's normal to see its levels increase in the scalp as well, because the body is basically like pumping out DHEA as well together with cortisol, right? When you're young and healthy. Now, this thing breaks down at an older age, because the zona reticulata, I think, is which is the one that's producing DHEA. It atrophies. There are three layers of the adrenal gland, and only the innermost one remains, which is the one producing cortisol. So basically, cortisol levels don't decline and don't change. They're basically like, after you reach adulthood, you have like this cortisol pattern stays unchanged for as long as you're alive. And actually, it starts to increase with hypothyroidism or chronic disease, especially in people with cancer or diabetes, right? So if the body cannot produce the gonadal androgens to oppose the effects of stress of cortisol, it's going to try to increase DHEA, and initially it can, but invariably you'll notice that basically as the levels of DHEA decline, which they're known to do with aging, right, as I said, because that layer of the adrenal gland atrophies, eventually actually the balding worsens. It's not a coincidence that older men, basically, I think there was a study that said like 92% of all males over 50 have some level of hair loss. And it coincides with the drastic decline in the gonadal androgens and of the adrenal androgen DHEA.
Yeah, I think there was a Truab paper in 2010 that said there's no precise statistics, but like 90% of Caucasian men and women have some degree of male pattern baldness in late age. And so
after 50, I think it said after 50 is the vast majority of them already have like a spot or, worse, of hair loss.
Yeah, but the women inclusion in that is like has to throw genetic androgen hypothesis people for a loop. You know what I mean?
Well, I have an article on that too.
Okay.
Testosterone treatment in women regrows hair. It's the second link from the bottom.
Okay, got it. Is this the pellets one? I might have seen this.
I don't know. Yes, it was pellets.
Okay, yeah.
But it's the same thing. I mean, basically, like, here we go. If the androgens were behind hair loss, right, you should have, and actually, if you look at the warnings on testosterone therapy for both men and women, actually, they say, one of the common side effects is hair loss, right? But this study found the exact opposite. If testosterone is the cause of and actually, they actually administered slightly higher than physiological amounts to women of the testosterone. And it's still basically like, I think 60% or something experienced hair regrowth. So again, I don't know. So the androgenic alopecia is not only a condition for men, it also happens in women. And in fact, basically, it's one of the signs/symptoms of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? And they're saying, we know this is because this syndrome is caused by androgens. Therefore, androgens must be also basically, and because these people also experience hair loss, ergo, androgens are causing the hair loss in women too, the androgenic alopecia in women too. But it's not. It's basically, it's just the administration of super physiological testosterone doses to women regrew their hair.
The results of our study were unexpected. Yeah. It's funny because
I think
sometimes
that's how basically you ensure that your study will be published.
Yeah.
Because you start with like, we have exposed the fraud. It's high time that this ends. Public flogging for all the endocrinologists that are currently employed. No journal is going. I think I told you, like, the preliminary results that I got for the DHT and prostate cancer study. I sent them to a few journals, and like I was like 8 journals out of the 8, 7 immediately came back and said this will not be published. And I'm like, well, why not? Well, it has nothing to do, because I found, initially I thought because I don't have any credentials, but then I found that research group in Bulgaria, right? And they're all PhDs, they're all MDs, et cetera, et cetera. No, even when they emailed the journals, the response from like 7 of them was, we will not publish this. Just don't even try. Don't waste your money, because you have to pay, it's like $500 review fee. Anytime you submit an article, it's actually a pretty expensive process. And basically, like, if you pay that fee, they're going to review the article and deny it. So they're just trying to save you that expense and saying, don't even bother. We're not going to take the hot potato. Go find your own journal, or start your own journal, because this will not be published.
Are you sure it's not Bulgarian discrimination?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it depends. I think it's because I insisted on using the pronoun he. If I had said he or anything like that.
Don't say anything more. I got many emails about our last conversation.
Did you?
Yeah, we'll just cut it right there.
Really, people were upset?
I'm just joking. I got some people that were miffed. I think you called. I won't even get into it. You were speaking. We're not immune from stress, right. And we're going through everything everybody else is going. And when we were talking last time, you just kind of like said it how it was, given your kind of life experience and what you think. And so I would never be like, Georgi, even though I just cut you off, so I'm a little bit not congruent in this situation, but like, I would never cut you off and say, Georgi, do not say that. You're just kind of speaking freely on this like messed up culture and situation that we were in. But some people took offense to it.
I mean, look, if you don't think that promoting hate between men and women, just as a very basic thing, if you don't think this is problematic, then you don't have to worry about any of the genders and sexual preferences and whatnot, because this alone can topple civilization, right? If there's hatred between men and women, it can end the civilization.
Well, okay, so that was the point. Some people were like, well, don't. Okay, so if somebody wants to be trans, don't denigrate them if you're saying at the same time that the powers that be want us all at each other's throats. That was the salient point from somebody that I was like,
I don't denigrate the trans.
Okay.
I denigrate the trans when they become violent and start to impose their lifestyle on others, right? It's like, look, if you feel trans and you want to use whatever pronoun it is that you want to use, right? Then say what that pronoun is, and so be it, right? But first of all, don't expect that everybody will actually acknowledge that. Some people believe that there are only 2 genders, and guess what? The evidence is on their side so far. If you look at the COVID death statistics, I only see males and females there. I don't see 47 genders, right? So until there's a change in society to accept these changes of like 40 whatnot genders, then don't expect that if you say, oh, I want to be gender number 32, right? And this is my pronoun. Well, some people will simply not accept that. It's not the current reality for most people, right? And to get violent in that and say that you are being discriminated against, I think it's uncalled for. I mean, look, when you have such a large number of people living together, it is impossible to satisfy every single person's desire and needs, right? And it's basically, as long as these people are not actively discriminating against you for the fact that you're trans, then you owe them the exact same thing in return. Don't shove it up in their eyes or like in their faces, right? That's all I really meant. But what I also meant is that basically, because some of these people feel discriminated, right, and some of them legitimately, the powers that be are saying, oh, look, we're going to take that exploited minority and we're going to weaponize it, right, and we're going to turn it against all the other groups. So it all becomes a fight amongst the plebs for crumbs. And it's not going to end until basically like we actually turn around and start attacking the powers that be. But that doesn't mean that we don't annoy each other, right? I mean, it's like it's. I think it will be more unrealistic to sit there and pretend like everything in society is fine, than basically say that there are certain things that annoy people, and as long as they're not being used to discriminate actively against a certain group of society, being annoyed by people is perfectly normal and natural. I get annoyed by people. People get annoyed by me. As long as we can find a common ground, I think we can move forward.
But this is something you have personal experience with. That's what.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I worked for a government contracting company for like 15 years. Yeah. Over the last, because I quit. I mean, I started my own company, right? But up until the last year I was a hired employee, we had these gender sensitivity trainings, basically how to talk to people, to like new potential clients. Basically, like there were things like, oh, you should never be alone with like a female, an unknown female at a government site without like at least another 2 or 3 people, right? And all of these things that at some point you're like, I mean, if I look at the rules, there were maybe like 37 of those or more. I mean, I was violating them left and right because I can't keep all these rules in my head. It becomes impossible to communicate with people. Don't approach unknown female in the dining area because it may be construed as like sexual harassment. Like if you're the only one staying late, which I was because hackers tend to work at odd hours, like we try to test the security of government systems. And sometimes like, I mean, I guess it can be interpreted as creepy. Who is this weird looking guy, roaming the hallways of the Federal Housing Agency. And there are these females who also work late and then they may feel creeped out, right? So it's like all of these rules of like what not to do. But if you try to observe them and try to follow them, life becomes impossible. It's not possible to go on with your life without offending somebody somewhere for some reason, right? And I think that's okay, right? I don't try to do that on purpose. As long as you're not offending people on purpose, as long as you're not discriminating against people and interfering with their lives, then I think this is actually enough. And the demand that I should like somebody, to me, goes too far.
Yeah, and again, our hypothesis here is that this culture is thrust upon us by entities like the Rockefeller Foundation and CIA and things like that. So it doesn't make it easier, So again, like Biden saying he's going to flood the U.S. with 11 million immigrants or whatever in a pandemic, which doesn't make any sense. Again, it's not like that will be people's new reality when that happens. But that is like, there's a book called Weapons of Mass Migration by Kelly Greenhill, I think, or whatever. So again, that is the weaponization of migration, and sexuality or transgenderdom, homosexuality has been weaponized against the public. And that's what we're trying to, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what we're trying to say here. And so people typically don't think that those types of things can be weaponized. Do you agree?
Yeah. They are being weaponized as we speak. I mean, look at the migrations that are happening in Europe. Now I'm starting to think that the whole process of destabilizing Middle Eastern countries and Northern African countries was for that reason, to create the conditions for this mass migration to happen and basically keep the strategy of constant tension. Basically, you can much more easily justify authoritarian measures and shift of the government towards totalitarianism if you have an external threat. And it's always being used. The fascists did it. Some of the communist countries did it. Many empires did it throughout history, right? It's just the external enemy tends to unite people and distract them from what you're doing behind the scenes. And even if they find out, they'll be like, well, there's a good reason for that. Look at this. Or I don't know, Arabs or Muslims or some terrorists are swimming through the Mediterranean and coming ashore and they're gonna kill us all, right? So that's what I don't think it was a coincidence, and it happened. It also happened in quite a few countries, right? It was like Libya, Tunisia, Egypt. I think it tried to have almost happened in Algeria, but somehow it was suppressed. But again. If you look at all of these events through the prism of nothing ever happens randomly on a world scale, that's the only explanation that I can find for it. That it was beneficial for destabilizing the Western world and getting it to accept a much more totalitarian rule, very similar to China's, right? Because I think the West is jealous of China's ability to achieve these incredible economic results because they don't observe human rights. And instead of trying to fight that and promote human rights, the Western world said, well, let's implement the same thing here.
Yeah, what was I just going to say? The CIA, there's some phrase, it's like nothing ever is in the world of espionage, nothing is ever a coincidence.
Nothing is ever coincidence. Yeah. Especially at the world level. I mean, like, how come these 5 countries suddenly decide to have a color revolution, right? And it succeeded in every single one of them, right? Mm-hmm. Because somehow the rebels were so well armed, trained, and funded. Mm-hmm. And these countries are not very rich, right? So it's like, this is not a coincidence. Somebody has been preparing this for a very, very long time. And who could do that without this breaking the news? Somebody very powerful who controls the media as well. Well, it's got to be, one of the imperial countries, one or more.
So again, we're not privy to all the secrets of the CIA or these think tanks, et cetera, et cetera. But this memo did come out at some point, this 1969 Jaffe Barrelson memo. And then you can see this is between 2 people that later worked for the Rockefeller Foundation, and they're theorizing ways of reducing population, and one of them is encourage increased homosexuality. So again, it's not a critique on that phenomenon. It's that it would be weaponized in the culture. And this is a HuffPost headline that says homosexuality is population control, why gays and lesbians are essential for the balance of nature. And then, of course, if you go one layer deeper on that, what does estrogen do? Can cause kind of a manic interest in sex and cause a person to become less discriminate about who they have sex with, and that's been shown in animals and things like that. And so
I'll say it even more directly, controversially. In animal studies, finasteride is already proven to engender gay behavior in males. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In that article that I keep postponing, like I never find the time to post in the forum. Remember, like the serial killers, pedophiles, etc. he had that article. He quotes several animal studies showing that finasteride basically removed the discrimination. So it removed the male preference for mating to females. Mm-hmm, so basically, they started mating indiscriminately.
And Alex Jones was right. They are making the frogs gay. The atrazine exposed males were both demasculinized, chemically castrated, and completely feminized as adults. And this was one of the questions I wanted to ask for Ray. Like, when would DHT, like the phenomena of the disappearing male, would 0.5 milligrams or a milligram of DHT be a reasonable strategy for combating the many things that in the environment are, again, not that they're unequal and the toxic things women experience in male, but maybe that would be helpful. For example, Ray was saying like EMF could lower testosterone as well. And so that might be something to talk to him about.
By activating the calcium channel. And basically calcium channel blockers have been shown in the past they're good not only for the heart, but they can in some cases treat hypogonadism if it's not severe and if there's no structural damage. So yeah.
So after talking about turning the frogs gay, transgenderdom, I'm going to encourage everybody to go ahead and follow the Telegram, because who knows how long we'll be on YouTube here. I hear there's a new live streaming service called Trovo. So maybe in the future we could switch over to that at some point. But follow the Telegram, and then I'm on Gab, gab.com/DannyRoddy. Georgi doesn't
Gab have like a bad reputation of like being, so Parler is like it's like the more mainstream right wing, right? Or like freedom of speech kind of stuff.
That's what they.
But I heard a Gab, or at least that's how the mainstream media presents it, right? Mm-hmm. I heard a Gab is like the hardcore version of it, which is mostly like I don't know, like almost fascist. Have you seen anything like that?
I've watched a few interviews with the Gab founder, and he just seems like a Trump fan. He's not like a Nazi or anything, but the Parler has kind of a weird background. The Mercers, who are kind of like a wealthy family, and I'm forgetting all the details about them, but they don't seem to be good people. And then they have, and then people were posting negative stuff about Israel on that website, and they were being censored. And so
Oh, wow.
I don't think
Okay.
that's a viable alternative either.
I think no matter where you are, if you post negative stuff about Israel, you'll probably get censored. Maybe only Telegram.
Yeah, that's
Why are
true.
you saying it's uncensorable? I mean, it's still a centrally
I'm not
hosted service.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. If I do say that I misspoke. I'm just saying, as of right now, that seems like the best alternative. But again, all these things, they get to a certain point and then they start becoming unusable, and so.
I think any central system, and I think that's why Ray recommends. When I asked him, I think other people sent him emails on that topic too. They said like, okay, so how can we organize? And he's saying anything that is centralized will immediately get compromised and owned by the powers that be. The only chance is like basically grassroots movements, highly distributed, like low level, basically like 10 to 20 people. And if you have like 3 million of those, right? That's how you basically prevent the system from infiltrating them all. They just don't have the capacity for that. But if it's a centrally controlled organization, they will find a way. If they can't compromise it, they'll shoot the leaders with snipers, as they were ready to do with the Occupy Wall Street, or put them in jail, or like concoct some kind of a fake, some fake accusation, or find something. Like, look, if you start digging deep down, who was that guy? I think it was like a former NSA chairman of NSA who said like the average American commits 3 felonies a day, basically every day. So if you're really trying to nail somebody, like especially if the federal government is after you, they'll find a way to like put you in jail.
Yeah, I don't know who runs Telegram. I'm not even familiar with it. But anyways, would you want to take a question real fast?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
let's do that. Let me go over here. Minimize this. And this one's from Muhammad. He tried to do this question when Ray was on, but the video didn't work.
Hey there, Danny and Georgi. This is my second time trying to do this. I initially submitted a question when Dr. Peat spoke, but that file got corrupted. It was a few weeks back. But I just wanted to re-ask my question regarding the COVID vaccine, or as some are calling it, the injectable medical device or whatever. Hypothetically, if someone were to get it, or someone got it and then they realized that they shouldn't have gotten it, is there any way to kind of like detox that out of our system, both the mRNA one and the non-mRNA one? Thanks, and have a good one.
Thanks, brother. What do you think, Georgie?
The mRNA one, if you get it, first of all, we don't know what percentage of people will incorporate that mRNA into the genome. There are various estimates. Luc Montagnier, who is the Nobel winner of 2008 and co-discoverer of the HIV virus, assuming it even exists, right? Because nothing is certain in this world. He said that he thinks about 5% will internalize that mRNA. That's a huge percentage. So if you have a 5% chance of getting this mRNA incorporated into your DNA, and if it happens in your case, I don't think there's nothing you can do. Basically, if it gets incorporated, the only hope is either gene editing therapy in the future through CRISPR, which is fraught with dangers, and so far was shown to not work. Basically generated all of these weird diseases in the animals when they grew up as adults. And basically, or the other option will be silencing that specific gene. So a drug will have to be developed that blocks the expression of that specific gene. So if you don't incorporate the mRNA into your DNA, if it's just floating around your organism, basically I think the risk is that you may have a dramatically higher sensitivity to exacerbations from future viral infections. It's called antibody-dependent enhancement, ADE. And in order to protect from that, it has already been shown that it's also driven by serotonin and the prostaglandins. So taking the aspirin or cyproheptadine or Benadryl, which also has anti-serotonin properties, already shown to be protective for COVID-19 specifically. And basically, you can take some of these chemicals stay relatively well protected for the next few months, taken on a daily basis, at which point the antibodies will wane for the COVID-19. And after the antibodies abate, then you can stop taking these drugs and you should be back to normal. And that would be the way to protect from the mRNA vaccine if it doesn't get incorporated into your genome. If it does incorporate, you're mostly screwed, right? So that's a huge reason not to take it, no matter what kind of incentives or threats they present. And if it doesn't get incorporated in your genome, then taking the regular anti-inflammatory approaches for a few months should protect from this ADE event. If you get like the flu or like the infection with a new strain of the coronavirus, and despite what they're telling you on TV, there are at least 50 different strains, even though they're saying, there's only one or two and they're more effective. There's at least 15 already known, and there's probably millions still to be discovered. But anyways, keeping the anti-inflammatory regimen in place until the antibodies wane would be a good approach. And then if you take the traditional vaccines like what the Chinese are doing with their Sinovac or the Russian Sputnik vaccine, it's just a typical chemical adjuvants triggering the TLR4 receptor, the endotoxin receptor, and that's how they trigger the immune response. They activate the immune response. Cyproheptadine, TLR4 antagonist, naltrexone, TLR4 antagonist, vitamin A and D, both of them TLR4 antagonists, Benadryl, TLR4 antagonist. So aspirin also would, even though activating the TLR4 receptor is an endotoxin specific thing, basically the downstream cascade still involves the prostaglandins. So taking aspirin would still have a protective effect, not at the top level, which is the activation of TLR4, but further down, but still very protective. And keeping PUFA intake as low as possible, and lipolysis. So niacinamide, aspirin, again, because aspirin is also an anti-lipolytic drug, keeping lipolysis at bay, because the less fat that is in your bloodstream, the less opportunity for you to develop that cytokine storm and go into multi-organ failure.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't like again. A lot of what you're saying is all on kind of good practice to keep inflammation low, but it would be nobody knows what this is going to do, and we're not going to find out until 30 to 50 years from now. And
so that's what I'm saying. The mRNA vaccine, if Montagnier is right and 5% will incorporate this into the genome, that's a huge percentage. Yeah. If somebody tells you that the procedure has a 5% death rate, I think it's pretty universally acknowledged that nobody will undergo the procedure, right? Voluntarily.
Yeah. But what I want to make as clear as possible that there is no amount of aspirin, methylene blue, like carrot salad. That stuff is all superfluous. I think well, that's what I said. You're mostly screwed.
If you take the mRNA and incorporate it to your genome, you're mostly screwed. Yeah. The only two ways out of this are gene editing or gene silencing, and neither one of which there's a technique currently enabled, discovered specifically for the spike protein. If it becomes a gene as well, right? Yeah. So if that happens, then all bets are off. If you're taking the anti-inflammatories or like things like progesterone or the angiotensin AC, the angiotensin converter enzyme inhibitors, it will still be protective, but you will have, as part of your body functions now, for as long as you're alive, the ability to produce inflammatory spike proteins, right? Yeah. So basically, everything you do as protection will be downstream of that, right? There will be no way, there's currently no way of stopping the production of spike proteins if the mRNA gets incorporated into your genome.
Yeah, thanks. I just don't want to give off the impression like, I can go get this vaccine and I'll be protected because I'm doing X, Y, and Z.
That's what I said. 5% is huge. If 5% of people incorporate this into their genome, I think we're screwed as a world. These people will start dropping off like flies from random things like sudden cardiac death or like heart attacks. You probably start seeing them in very, very young people, like teens or people in their 20s. We're already seeing them, right? But it's mostly due to things like contraceptives, endocrine disruptors in the water, et cetera, mostly due to the estrogenic and anti-thyroid effects of those disruptors. But this thing now, like the chronic inflammation that it will produce specifically by activating the angiotensin renin system, then all hell will break loose. You will basically be a chronically cardiovascularly ill person for life, and it will be by design. It will be in your genome.
And again, not to beat a dead horse, but you mentioned multiple strains earlier. is it too far to speculate that the idea is to vaccinate frequently? And so just because somebody's dodged a bullet of one vaccine doesn't mean you won't be subject to having to get another vaccine next year or next month or whatever. Like my again, this might be extreme and please put me in check, but if your employer or something is telling you you have to get a vaccine, the only viable option would be to quit. Like
to leave,
So
and possibly sue, because in some states the private employers are not allowed to do that unless you work in there's some exemptions, like hospitals. I think hospitals, food processing entities, and I think schools are and prisons. They're allowed to require like the employees to get the vaccine, but like regular commercial companies, like if you look for an IT company or like, I don't know, a logistics company or whatnot, or like a Photoshop or something, they're not, in some states, they're prohibited from mandating getting the vaccine. Mm-hmm. So in some states you can actually sue, but in many states, the only option will be to quit.
Question or article?
It's up to you.
Let's do one more question. Let me hide this guy. Okay, this one's from Ellie.
Hello, Danny, Georgi, and everyone.
Wicked stash.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And things like Tums. Is heavy metal contamination an issue with chronic use of those supplements? Thank you.
So is it Tums?
10 out of 10 mustache. He said it's for calcium supplementation. Is there a heavy metal contamination with Tums? Is that what he said? Some of you have to look at. I mean, the ones that are flavored and colored, some of them use like these, like a yellow 5 or a red 7 or something. Some of those are based on iron. I think like the yellow, some of the pink and the red colors are based on an iron salt. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then I'll be hesitant of taking them. But you can also get like the regular unflavored. I think they can get like the white colored Tums that are menthol flavored. And those should be. There we go. This is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah, but I think they used to have before a Tums, which was the pills were white and they were mintily flavored. Mm-hmm. They didn't have any colors. But I think they still contain things like talc. And that by itself is already a problem. So even though you may be able to avoid the heavy metal toxicity issue by looking for a specific brand that's not colors, it's white, right? Because there's calcium carbonate inside. There may still be the issue of the other excipients, and typically they're either silicon dioxide or talc. And neither one of these is nice. I mean, it's kind of like it's doing the opposite of what Tums is supposed to do. It's supposed to calm your digestion, but both the silica and the talc are really strong irritants of the GI tract.
And Ray in his Nutrition for Women book said how terrible mineral oil was, just off of memory.
Yeah, I think that one is actually heavy. It's got some heavy metal components in it. Because it's like he said it's like a toxic waste product of the oil industry, I think, or something.
That makes sense.
Or yeah.
Okay, your call. If you want another article?
Let's do another question.
Okay.
One more. People have gone through a trouble of recording them. We might as well try to answer.
We have 4 more, but we can answer some of them or not all of them. Let me hide this. Okay, this one's from Melissa.
Hello, Danny and Georgi and all. Thank you for everything you do. I wanted to know if you have any input on a health issue that has been a pestering enigma for a very long time for me. It's severe chemical sensitivity. Despite doing all of the other obvious things for many, many years, I found Dr. Peat over 20 years ago and very familiar with getting thyroid function and hormone function right, and balancing the intestine and all the hormones and nutrition and liver and oysters and light, as you can see, etc. And have attained a lot of wonderful results. Where I had come from a place when I was younger of a lot of issues due to being given estrogen for many, many years, because I was misdiagnosed as a young person. And despite all of these integrations, I have not found an answer for this severe chemical sensitivity issue, which just keeps getting worse. I was in New York City for 19 years before I relocated to Colorado 3 years ago, thinking that that might help at a fairly high altitude, and eating well and all of the things that we talk about. But it's only gotten worse, even though I'm in a much more pure environment. So trying to figure out what else I could possibly try. I would love to know if you have any knowledge or experience or ideas for someone who literally just can't. Every time I walk out the door, it's just another reaction, constant reactions that are pretty severe and systemic. So thank you so much. I'm very grateful for any ideas you might have.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it. Georgie, what do you think?
So, I didn't hear what does she mean by chemical sensitivity? Does she get like an allergic reaction? Does she get like what are her symptoms in terms of chemical sensitivities?
That's a great question.
Well, based on trying to guess what she meant by that, I have maybe 3 female, not clients, but people women who've emailed me. Mm-hmm. Estrogen is heavily involved in any chemical sensitivity. Mm-hmm. I know Pete will say low thyroid function, but it's actually the low thyroid function raising estrogen, and it's the estrogen that triggers the chemical sensitivities. And it's known to exacerbate the sensitivity of, especially of asthmatic people with asthma, mm-hmm. to a number of different fine air particulates is what they call them, that they're not normally sensitive to. So speaking of these 3 women, 2 of them got put. One of them basically got put on an intravaginal high progesterone dosage because of ovarian issues, of ovarian fibroids and uterine fibroids, and basically her chemical sensitivities disappeared. Like she used to get like these swollen sinuses and airways from just breathing slightly. I don't want to call it dirty air, but city air, right? And it wouldn't be consistent. It would basically coincided with her the time of her ovulation, and then she measured her estrogen, came back normal, but her prolactin turned out to be high. And anyways, the doctor discovered fibroids, and she got put on the high dose progesterone. I think it was like a suppository that would release 50 milligrams daily. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why this is considered high dosage. I think Ray would consider that a physiological dose for most women. The second woman was diagnosed with, she had chemical sensitivities her whole life, got diagnosed with stage 1 estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. Doctor offered clomiphene and tamoxifen. She asked me, I said to say no. And then the doctor offered exemestane, the aromatase inhibitor. She got put on that, and she's taking, the doctor asked her to take it 25 milligrams daily, but she thought it was too much for her. It was making her like very agitated and was causing insomnia. So she started taking 12 milligrams, and all of her chemical sensitivities went away. She used to get like really bad allergic reactions from any kind of a food that contained insoluble fiber. And now she seems to be able to eat fine. Her prolactin has gone down to the lower 25th percentile of the normal range. And the third one, basically she has rheumatoid arthritis, which is also a known estrogen-driven disease, and then toxin as well. And she basically quit all of her immunosuppressive drugs and started taking high dosage of aspirin, which has known anti-estrogenic effects. And she's taking 6 grams daily in 3 divided doses of 2 grams each. Mm-hmm. And she also struggled with chemical sensitivities, both in air and in food. And those also seem to have dissipated. So I think estrogen is a very, very important component. And she mentioned that she was on estrogen therapy when she was younger, mm-hmm. right? I would do the tests not just for estradiol, but also for estrone sulfate, and prolactin. And if any one of these comes back abnormal, meaning in the upper 25th percentile of normal range, because that range is anything but normal, they keep raising the upper bound every year, then I would consider doing something as an anti-estrogenic therapy like progesterone and vitamin E. They synergize greatly. It'd probably be the most benign thing to do. Orally works great as well. And then, depending on what the tests show, and if if prolactin or, estrone, they don't respond sufficiently to the progesterone and vitamin E, then, maybe consider like an aromatase inhibitor for a week or two just to bring things under control, and then go back on that vitamin E and progesterone. I do think that long-term usage of the aromatase inhibitors should be done only at the lower dosages, which, by the way, for exemestane has been shown that if it's used for more than a month, the 6 milligram daily dose produces about the same inhibition of estrogen, serum estrogen, as the full 25 milligram dose. And at the 6 milligram dose, none of the patients experienced any side effects. But again, I would prefer to stay with more of the bioidentical approaches. So only use the exemestane or another aromatase inhibitor to bring things under control, and then from that try to jump onto the progesterone / vitamin E / vitamin D, A, and K, and aspirin therapy, because those should be able to keep estrogen under control after it has already been brought under control.
And we'd probably need more information, but what about the possibility of like some long-term fungal or bacterial infection? Like that could definitely cause severe sensitivity or histamine reactions and things like that.
I think those exacerbate them. I don't think those are the actual cause by itself, but actually estrogen is also behind fungal issues and SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I think I mentioned in one of the previous podcasts, but they found out that in rodents, this condition, leaky gut and the chronic low-grade endotoxemia, it increases with aging, and then they found out that gonadectomy fully reverses that process. So they thought, androgens, right? It's the androgens that are involved. But then they administered an androgen and it had the same protective effects. So the only thing that remains is for estrogen to be causing that as well. And there's another study which kind of confirms that, is that basically it's known that a subset of the Asian population cannot really tolerate alcohol because they lack the enzyme that metabolizes, they underexpress the enzyme aldehyde dehydrogenase. So when they drink alcohol, they have a rapid metabolism of alcohol into acetaldehyde, but then the second step doesn't work very well. So they get flushing and symptoms that resemble very closely the chemical insensitivities. And recent studies found out that giving these people aromatase inhibitors actually prevents that from happening. So it's still estrogen behind the scenes inhibiting the metabolism of alcohol and driving the insensitivity, basically the buildup of toxins. But the fungal issues are actually, if there are fungal issues, it used to be a reliable sign of estrogen dominance. It was actually one of the first things that a doctor would do in the 50s or 60s if they examine a female patient and they find like a yeast infection, vaginal yeast infection, would be to prescribe progesterone. They don't do this anymore. They think now they're saying like it's something else. It's genetic, right? It's or poor hygiene or whatnot. But it has a very heavy endocrine component. Any kind of a fungal infection, estrogen is involved because it actually promotes the growth of almost all fungi and yeast. I mean, the yeast infection. Ray has I think he has like 2 or 3 paragraphs in one of his articles saying that estrogen is perhaps like the main driving hormone of yeast development. And I think he meant brewer's yeast, but the article was talking about brewer's yeast, but then I've followed up on the research. It seems to be true for any kind of a pathological fungal development that can develop into humans.
Amazing stuff. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Georgi, for that. Okay, what if we do childhood stress causes mental illness, then we do the keto article. We'll take a few more questions and then we'll call it a night. What do you think?
That's fine.
Okay. So let's let me open this one. What do you have a preference, keto or childhood?
They're both interesting studies. I know the keto will actually generate a lot of hate on Twitter.
That's why we're going to talk about it.
Say it again?
That's why we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. So it's really very, what should I call it? The results are very straightforward. And it doesn't leave much of a wiggle room to explain away the findings through like a poor design of the study or not, because in addition to giving the ketogenic diet, they also cause the exact same things. And they actually, you scroll down exactly to the right quote. They administered beta hydroxybutyrate, which is, it's not a ketone. Ray keeps saying it's not a ketone. It's the reduced version of acetoacetate. So it's a sign of reductive stress and it's elevated in diabetic people as well. But basically, the exogenous administration of this fat byproduct of fat metabolism mimicked fully the profibrotic anti-mitochondrial effects of the ketogenic diet. And make no mistake, no matter what fat you eat, if you are on the ketogenic diet, whether you're loading up with PUFA or saturated fat, you will still be producing these ketone bodies, and you will still be overproducing beta-hydroxybutyrate, and you will still be getting into the situation where you're activating the sirtuin genes, which are involved in fatty acid oxidation. They're now known to be involved in cancer. Almost every cancer overexpresses the SIRT 1 through 7, usually all of them, but at least one or two. And it's been shown that sirtuin inhibitors actually can lower excessive fatty oxidation and block cancer growth. Niacinamide is the most potent clinically used sirtuin inhibitor. Resveratrol is the most potent clinically used in cancer. So before you start, it's still being advertised left and right. So that's what this thing does. It actually mimics the cancer metabolism by taking resveratrol. It's also a phytoestrogen. The ketogenic diet generated cardiac fibrosis, but it also caused mitochondrial damage in all other organs that the study examined. And if you're causing mitochondrial damage, maybe the heart was the most susceptible to developing the fibrosis. But make no mistake, if you're inhibiting mitochondrial metabolism, you're putting all organs at risk for fibrosis and eventually cancer. And I like the conclusion. Unless the adverse effects of ketogenic diet can be effectively avoided, healthy individuals should reconsider the use of ketogenic diet for weight loss. So that's a nice way of saying that. First of all, if you have a diet which generates these adverse effects that need to be mitigated, right? I think that's a pretty good sign. Should be a pretty good sign that it's probably not a diet that's worth embarking on, right? But even for those people, and you can tell from the way they write the article that they are kind of pro keto. They also said surprisingly, shockingly, unexpectedly, like the quite a few sentences with those words in the study. Even they are saying that the results are pretty pretty straightforward, and you got to have a very good reason to be embarking on the keto diet. And weight loss is not a good one, because if you remember that study, we discussed it in like maybe 3 months ago, that it only works in the first few weeks, and after that it causes insulin resistant obesity and eventually diabetes. So there you go. If those two studies alone are not enough to reconsider the low carb diet, then I don't know what will be.
I feel like people are coming around on this because I get far fewer emails about it than we used to. So
the fad slowly went away, right? And now there's nothing else left now except embracing the Peatarian diet, because everything else has already been tried. All the other fads have already been tried and failed.
All roads lead to the bioenergetic approach, I think, eventually.
I really don't see how it can be any other way. I mean, ultimately, even matter is a poor substitute for energy. So if at the core is always energy.
Straight from the source. Okay, so let's do childhood stress causes mental illness.
Yes. So actually, the androgen blunting. So what the study showed is basically in both males and females. So that's why in my post I say we need to move away from the discussion of male and female hormone. They're actually males and females produce all of the hormones, including males producing progesterone and estrogen, which are known as female hormones, and females producing testosterone and even dihydrotestosterone, which are known as the male hormones. They're not. It's all dependent on context, how much of it you're producing, and how the interplay, how the various hormones affect each other. So it's an ever-changing system of balance, of checks and balances. But to speak of a hormone being exclusively female or male, I don't think that's correct. And anyways, in this case, it showed that early childhood stress blunted the increase in androgens, which started to happen during puberty. And the more blunted the response of androgens to the onset of puberty, in other words, testosterone levels rise dramatically in boys after they enter puberty, but in adolescent boys that were stressed as children, basically the testosterone levels rose by only about 20% of what they normally should do, and it predicted completely the development of basically mental illness later on in life in both males and females. And the part that I found surprising is that they only found a connection between lower levels of testosterone and the mental illness, but their hypothesis was that they will find the same correlation with DHEA. However, I think the DHEA, like the studies that I have seen, the role of DHEA starts to become more primary later on in life when the gonadal function declines. So you'll need a longer-term studies to test for the link of DHEA and mental illness. And my explanation is that both of these, testosterone and DHEA, are the native cortisol blockers, among the native cortisol blockers. And every single mental disease known currently is already, there's strong evidence that it has excessive cortisol at its core. Whether it's bipolar disorder, clinical depression, many of the psychosis, some of the personality disorders, the schizophrenias, all of these have cortisol and, of course, serotonin, because while cortisol is the direct cause of many of the actual manifestations of the disease, such as memory and memory loss and poor mood, it's actually serotonin that is really behind it all. And that's why anti-serotonin drugs can be used to treat both mental diseases and more structural disorders like Cushing disease. Cushing disease is a disease of excessive cortisol production due to a tumor in the pituitary. However, administering anti-serotonin drugs has been shown to fully cure it and shrink the tumor and make it go away, which demonstrates that it's really serotonin behind the development of hypercortisolemia. It shouldn't surprise anybody, because the first thing that stress does is elevate serotonin.
I'm glad you mentioned serotonin. When I was watching the second 4-hour Ray interview, I think we've talked about this before, but Ray was talking about detoxifying serotonin through the lungs. Mm-hmm. And if that didn't happen, there would be a big elevation of nitric oxide. And he was describing how testosterone was essential for mitigating that rise in nitric oxide. I think it's like, there's CAMP, cyclic. Oh man, there's
CAMP.
Yeah, CAMP. And then there's G. There's an opposite one that testosterone promotes that gets rid of.
Yeah, guanyl cyclase, I think is the one that's called. Yes.
Ray's written about it, but that just reminded me again of these androgen modifications of these like powerful activations of these stress systems. But,
so the androgens are required for the proper detox of nitric oxide and serotonin. Is that what he was saying?
Yeah, don't quote me on that, but I'm fairly, he invoked testosterone when talking about the serotonin's activation of the classical stress systems, as well as the role of nitric oxide in intensifying that process, right. And then testosterone being a specific hormone to oppose that. And so it's not something.
And if that's not enough, both testosterone and DHT are known to inhibit tryptophan hydroxylase. Mm-hmm. So basically, they also limit they cut the overproduction of serotonin at the core.
And I have to read about this more, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but I think calcitriol activates tryptophan hydroxylase as well.
Yes, it actually, I think it actually activates one of the serotonin receptors directly.
Yeah, so, we're having a podcast about vitamin D. Is that going to be a public thing? Do you know where Kitty wants to have that podcast?
I don't know. I mean, I know she wants to have it, but I didn't know if. Well, it probably be public. I mean, all of the ones that I've had so far have been public. Why would it be private?
I don't know. Kitty Blomfield wants to have, or is going to have, Georgi, myself, Kate Deering, and then Matt Blackburn on to talk about vitamin D. I don't know if it's for her private group. I don't think it is. But anyways, we'll keep you guys up to date. That's supposed to happen a few days from now, and so it should be interesting. I can't even believe it's happening.
There'll be a lot of hate thrown on that podcast. That guy on Twitter, actually, he's kind of disappeared. Steve or whatever his name was.
Who?
The guy who was like the big pro calcitriol.
Anyways, it should be fun no matter what, because Matt is a rational, good human. Okay, thank you for that, Georgi. That was excellent. Let's take a few questions and then we'll get out of here. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys, everybody in the chat. Thank Georgi Dinkov for providing Tokovit. Go to t.me/DannyRoddy/324. Subscribe to the channel and then leave a comment and we'll announce the winner next time. Pin the giveaway, post to Telegram so it's easier to find. I'll do that next time. Appreciate it, guys. And again, thank you to Georgi for gracing us with his presence, spending time away from his family. Sincerely appreciate it, Georgi, like meeting week after week after week. So a significant contribution to be here, and sincerely appreciate it. You make these worth doing, and I couldn't imagine doing it with anybody else. So thank you.
Thanks to the great audience, man. I mean, it's giving me some meaning in life while the National Guard is thrashing the city.
Some bit of solace to protect you from the culture, I guess, while talking about it at length.
I kid you not, these things are therapeutic. I mean,
I think so.
I think we need to, everybody is trying to get close to a group of like-minded people that give them a sense of meaning, because let's face it, the entire culture, everything around us is already designed to destroy meaning. So little things like that is the only thing that's currently left that makes life worth living. I mean, I also have children, but that by itself wouldn't be enough, because knowing what kind of world we live in, right? If you feel like you brought children into this world and the world is getting dramatically worse, it's not gonna give you a great sense of meaning.
Ray, in his 1994 book, said, "Giving maximum meaning to our lives should be one of the basic things that we demand of our work."
That's right. Sense of purpose.
I mean, I concur. There was like 2 or 3 weeks where we didn't have them, and it was like I had stuff to do, but it wasn't as exciting, and so I appreciate you.
It avoids getting into the routine of life, which in life for everybody living in this environment is designed to be a routine, a crushing routine.
I haven't even talked about this yet. Give us an update on Idealabs, then we'll do the questions after that.
I will probably release a new product. Would be either quinine by itself or like a mix of quinine and aspirin, but I want to do like a cancer study with it, because I suspect that we're going to have some pretty good results with that. Quinine turns out to be a remarkably interesting substance. I think I mentioned a few times, even with Ray, it inhibits the uptake of tryptophan into the cell, and it can happen. It can do that at like the low micromolar concentrations, and really, really high concentrations, which only patients with malaria taking quinine would achieve. Quinine also inhibits tryptophan hydroxylase, and at the relatively at moderate concentrations, it actually blocks the 5-HT2, 5-HT3, and 5-HT7 receptors. So it seems to be a fairly decent non-selective serotonin antagonist. And last but not least, it seems to inhibit the uptake of L-carnitine into the cell, which lowers the oxidation of fat and promotes, conversely, the oxidation of glucose. The drug meldonium, its two core effects are inhibition of the synthesis of L-carnitine and also the inhibition of uptake of L-carnitine into the cell. So, and that's speaking of Idealabs, we're working on a successor to meldonium, which should be able to do both of these things much more powerfully, but over the counter, or at least not over the counter, but more freely available for everybody. A decent mimetic of that turns out to be quinine. And since aspirin has some of these carnitine depletion effects, I think that's probably the main reason aspirin is therapeutic for cancer. It's the fact that it inhibits the oxidation of fat and promotes the oxidation of glucose. But it does so at very high doses. I think that's why Ray keeps saying that if he had cancer, he'll take like 6 to 7 grams a day. And I always thought, like, why such a specific number? Like, where is this coming from? And when I looked at the various studies on how aspirin affects the metabolism, in millimolar concentrations, which is achievable, about 3 grams of aspirin give you a concentration of 1 millimole. And you need about 2 to 3 millimoles to actually start significantly inhibiting fat oxidation, which means several grams a day. And when about 2 years ago, I sent him a study. I said, "Is that why you're recommending these specific doses of aspirin, which are high, right? But they're not the highest that have been used clinically. Some studies, even for diabetes, use like 9 to 10 grams daily." And he said, "Yes, basically, it's the idea is to starve the cancer of the fat and allow the cancer cells to," he put cancer in quotes, "to allow the cancer cells to metabolize glucose, at which point," I think he said, like, even the dumbest medical experts will quickly realize there is no such thing as a cancer cell. I think he kind of said it like, if you allow the cancer cell to metabolize glucose again, it will almost instantly turn back to normal.
That's called differentiation?
Differentiation.
Yeah.
Red differentiation, or whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Thanks for that. Okay, let's hide this. Who is our next? This one's from Islam. Okay, here we go.
Hi Danny, hi Georgi. First of all, thank you for what you're doing. It's a great information. Thank you for this show. And I see that you are focusing a lot of in chemicals and chemicals and drugs. I want to ask you if you are familiar with the works of Dr. Hamed and this trend of biodecodification or biodecoding. If I understand it properly, he says that the stress, heredity, or your own trauma, it's the main cause of the disease. And the way to cure it, it's relieving it, like bring it awareness or consciousness to the source of the trauma. I heard that Ray mentioned something similar, and I don't know what's your take on this, and as well what's your opinion in general about the psychology like a science. And the last question would be if you know any way with the chemicals or another way to bring this awareness or consciousness and relieve the pain, basically. Thank you again, guys. Have a good day.
Thanks, Islam. What do you think, Georgie?
So a couple of things. Studies in the 50s and 60s with LSD showed that if you give people LSD, not only would cure their depression, but while they were talking with a psychotherapist about their traumatic event that was the source of their illness, once they were under the influence of LSD, they were able to face and relive and reimagine that event, but without the traumatic experience. And it basically broke their learned helplessness. But in order for you to do that, I think it will be dangerous to simply try to relive that experience, even if you're under the care of a psychiatrist, because it's the energetic resources that determine whether reliving and remembering the traumatic experience will be a therapeutic event or even further traumatize you. So basically, again, the energetic resources are of paramount importance, and also the levels of serotonin. If what was the quote that Ray said? When all the energy is at the right level and all the factors in the right proportions, you can feel however you want about anything you want.
That's the quote I'm looking for.
Yeah. So that is true, but it's with a great caveat in there if the energetic resources are sufficient. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that simply the psychotherapist simply forcing a traumatized person to remember and re-experience their trauma in a clinical setting where they're under the care of professionals, that by itself will be therapeutic. I think it will be, if the person is energetically compromised, I think it will further increase the damage. But if the serotonin system has been blocked or greatly inhibited, and the learned helplessness is broken, it's the equivalent of that study with the rats, which saw that when a rat escaped a torturous situation, then basically these rats immediately regained hope again, and they start fighting against the system. So I think that's what really this does. It's once you feel like you're in control and you have the energetic resources to throw at a traumatic situation, you understand that nothing is really traumatic if you can muster up the energetic response.
Yeah, this isn't the quote, but that other one was something like, pretend all the versions of yourself are in the same room. Room. And then
nothing is stored.
Yeah. He started with saying nothing is stored. Pretend all the versions of yourself are in the same room. And something like your metabolism or your resonance is who you most closely identify with. So if I took I took it to mean if I took a thyroid toxic drug, I might most closely resonate with depressed 16-year-old Danny or something like that. Yeah. And so he had a more interesting, beautiful explanation about it. But this quote is kind of similar. And he says, making an effort to learn how to use techniques of food, hormones, light, activity, etc., is similar to the effort needed to work with a psychologist, and the effort itself is part of the therapy. And so that I feel like I actually see that with people I talk to. It's they know how hard all this stuff we're talking about is, to adopt some huge new paradigm. They're coming from low carb and to do all these things. But when they start doing it, at first it makes zero sense. And then when they start kind of engaging in things, they'll have little wins, oh, this changed this or this changed that. And they'll start to feel better, and they'll be enacting this quote, basically. It's the whole process is a type of therapy in and of itself. And so Yeah, I really think he's
he also
onto something.
said that basically your brain resonates with its past states all the time, whether you want it or not. And which past state it resonates with will be determined by basically the current energetic state. So it's like, I guess like attracts like, right? So if you're, I mean, I guess that's my personal experience, but I think most people have experienced this themselves. You reminisce about an event. Let's say it's an unpleasant event, right? And your reaction to that memory will be different depending on how you feel at a day. If you're in a good mood, everything is going well, right? You're likely to brush it aside and say like, oh, no big deal. But if you're depressed, if something, things are not going right, you're stressed out, you're tired, then you're much more likely to sit there and ruminate, which is a sign of depression already. It's like one of the signs of impending learned helplessness. So it's just basically like the brain has all of these past states to resonate with, and it resonates with the one that it's most similar energetically to the brain's current state.
You want to get the light, and I'll just thank everybody.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you. Sincerely appreciate it. We'll read a few more questions here. Next week, Ray Peat will be on, and he has a new newsletter that you guys should have all received. And so, Georgi, I was telling everybody that Ray has a new newsletter that we'll read and then talk about with him, and then ask him a bunch of random questions. Okay, so we have 2 questions, and then we'll call it a night. Okay, so this one is from hide this. This one's from Eric.
Hey dudes. So Danny, you know a little bit more about my situation, but I got off of antibiotics, and the day I got off of antibiotics, my stomach went insane. I couldn't sleep, and I went 4 days without sleeping. I'd be curious your opinion about that. I took penicillin BK 250 milligrams 3 times a day, and was trying to treat a perceived bacterial infection. And also, I guess maybe what's more important now to me is I had like a high resting pulse, no fever or anything, and I feel like my fight or flight is just stuck on. Like I feel adrenalized when I lay down to go to sleep at night. It just ain't happening, like my feels like I'm too adrenalized to go to sleep. And even when the say like the heart medication I got to lower my pulse rate, even when it lowers, it still feels like I have like this background adrenaline or something going on. So I was curious, do you have any like tried and true strategies for insomnia where it just feels like the gas pedal is stuck to the floor? Thanks, guys.
I thought we were like not live for a second. Is the chat still going? Okay, I think we're still good. That's really weird. Okay. I'm a little bit familiar with his situation. What do you think based on what you just heard there?
So the penicillin antibiotics are, some of them are known to actually irritate the colon, depending on the dosage. I also don't know about the specific product. Did he have like things like silica inside or any of the other commonly used GI irritating excipients? But also because when you suppress the bacteria, if there is a latent fungal infection, like Candida or anything else, they're very opportunistic. So there could be a temporary increase in the fungal population, and that may have caused the stomach issues that he had. The insomnia is usually actually driven by either high serotonin or estrogen. If you remember, there was a study posted on the forum maybe about 4 years ago that aromatase inhibitors can treat epilepsy, even an intractable one. In that same study, they cite several other studies because insomnia is it's like a common symptom in epilepsy, and they're related. Basically, the disturbance in sleep, it usually precedes the development of seizures. They cited 4 other studies which showed that the administration, lowering estrogen basically, or opposing its effects, cures insomnia. So it's all part of the stress system. I mean, high cortisol can cause insomnia. The fact that there is a high heart rate tells me that adrenaline is elevated. If adrenaline rises within 5 minutes after it rises, cortisol also starts to rise as well. They always go hand in hand. So serotonin can actually also cause insomnia. If there is if there's this tired but wired feeling, which I kind of am sensing that's what he's describing, and especially if there is muscle twitching, that is a very reliable sign that serotonin is overproduced and is also involved. In terms of trying to relieve it, I think progesterone is probably going to be the most direct and intervention that covers all of these angles. It has an anti-adrenolinic effect, it has a sympatholytic effect. It has an anti-cortisol effect. It has an anti-estrogen effect, and it's also a GABA agonist. So it should cover all of these things that are related to the insomnia and the feeling of tired but wired. Obviously, simpler things like increasing salt and making sure you avoid starch for a week, just to allow the GI tract to heal if the antibiotic did anything or any of the excipients was the cause for that. Because intestinal irritation is now known to lead to things like the so-called restless leg syndrome, or RLS, right? But also it's the most severe versions of that are also known to lead to chronic insomnia. So irritation of the GI tract can cause all of these things, and they kind of promote each other as well. So if you irritated the gut, of course, the histamine, serotonin, nitric oxide, estrogen, adrenaline, cortisol all rise. Then they cause further digestive issues and so on. So I'll try the progesterone. Probably, if you're okay with it, you can try an anti-serotonin as well. Benadryl is not bad. It's not as potent as cyproheptadine, but it still has a pretty decent anti-serotonin effect. And it should be used in the lower dosages only, 25 to 50 milligrams, no more. Because at the higher dosages, diphenhydramine, which is the generic chemical name for Benadryl, starts to act as an SSRI. So basically, the 25 to 50 milligram is mostly anti-serotonin, antihistamine effect, and makes people sleepy. But anything more than that, anything more than 100 milligrams is risking it. So that will be what I would try. You can try charcoal. I've had a few clients or people emailing me saying that taking charcoal or eating the carrot salad provided instant relief from that agitated feeling, like something is not going right. Basically, it's most of that is driven by serotonin, estrogen, and cortisol. I think serotonin is actually the master conductor of it all, and it's just lowering the serotonin production in the gut and its absorption into the bloodstream is usually enough to relieve most of these symptoms. Though the anti-acid drug famotidine, several people have already reported, because we have a study on the forum that claims it's very potent anti-serotonin, can even stop a serotonin, like a fully developed serotonin syndrome, which has a 30% lethality. So it's an over-the-counter drug, and in the 10 to 20 milligram doses daily, it does not inhibit acid production. So you're only getting the anti-serotonin effect without, blocking the acid production, which we don't want.
I didn't think about the penicillin fungal infection angle. So that's pretty interesting, especially given his kind of like a wild reaction to penicillin. So, okay. Yeah,
Ray responded similarly to somebody sent an email about minocycline, and Ray responded cryptically saying like minocycline can suppress thyroid and can exacerbate fungal infections.
That's interesting. Okay. I think think you've said that before. Okay, guys, we're going to do one more question and get out of here. Please give this episode a like, subscribe on t.me/DannyRoddy for show updates. I will do timestamps directly after this. I'll stay up. I will upload this, to probably like Spotify and BitChute and Telegram probably tomorrow. And again, thank you, Georgi Dinkov, Idealabsdc.com. Sincerely appreciate it. Okay. So this last one is from Sam. So let me hide this. Okay, Sam.
Hey, Danny. Hey, Georgi. Looking forward to listening to the next podcast you guys have. My question is all about calcium supplementation in regards to having the proper ratio with vitamin D and vitamin K specifically. I'm curious if you can take too much vitamin K or vitamin D if you are somewhat deficient in calcium. I do not intake a lot of calcium in my diet or via supplementation. Neither seem to agree with me. And I'm just curious if you can take too much vitamin K or vitamin D, and if that would cause more deficiency in calcium and cause more leaching out of the bones. Curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks. Bye.
What do you think?
I don't think you can take too much vitamin K, at least not. I mean, the doses before vitamin K got approved for osteoporosis in Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, and I think Malaysia. These 4 countries at this point, vitamin K is approved for this indication. There were human studies that tested up to 45 milligrams 3 times daily. So that's 135 milligrams of vitamin K, MK4, menotetrinone daily, and there were no side effects except mild digestive upset. So the effects of vitamin K are largely pro-metabolic. It's a quinone, right? So the only thing that you should be experiencing if you take too much is basically at some point you may be running short on glycogen stores, and you may be causing hypoglycemia and correspondingly like a stress reaction, like a reactive hypoglycemia, which would raise cortisol, and you get this jitteriness, right? But if you're eating well, I don't think you should be causing issues. It'll be the same risk as thyroid, right? I mean, the only thing thyroid can do harmfully is if you're pressing on the pedal, all right, but you don't have gas in the tank. So that would be my take on vitamin K. That being said, most people, for bone health purposes, it's been shown that you probably don't need more than 5 milligrams daily to maximally activate the bone building system. But that was done in healthy people, not in people with osteoporosis or any other kind of health condition. So assuming he's relatively healthy, 5 milligrams daily was enough to maximally stimulate the bone building system. Now, you do need calcium for that, right? So if you're just maxing up the bone building system and there's no calcium, not much will happen. I don't think this will lead to leaching calcium from the bones unless you're chronically deficient in calcium in your diet, in which case parathyroid hormone and or prolactin will be high, and calcitriol will probably also be high, and then you will have elevated serum calcium. So you can do that. I mean, you can test it and test these things and see what's the state of your calcium system. But even if your serum calcium is high, parathyroid hormone is high, and calcitriol is high, taking vitamin D actually should remedy the situation, because through a negative feedback effect and acceleration of the breakdown of calcitriol, both lowering parathyroid hormone, decreasing the synthesis of calcitriol and increasing its degradation, cholecalciferol, or even or if you take ergocalcifediol, I think it's like calcifediol, which is vitamin D2, both of these, but the D3 one, the cholecalciferol being safer, they should actually help to bring the system back into balance. Now, I know some of our critics on Twitter disagree, but I already found the studies that demonstrate that, human studies. So it's the least I can say it's backed up by evidence. Now, it makes little sense to load up on vitamin D and K if you're not also supplementing with calcium, or at least making sure it's part of your diet. I mean, they are part of the calcium homeostasis system, so you should be supplying the raw material as well. If you're not, then at some point, basically, what may happen is that when you ingest calcium, you may go more towards soft tissue calcification than towards bone building. There's a paper, I think it was from the 1980s, that showed that there's an unknown mechanism through which calcium deficiency leads to soft tissue calcification, even in the absence of elevated parathyroid hormone. So the body will actually calcify your soft tissues if you're chronically depriving of calcium, even if you're taking these other measures such as taking vitamin D and taking vitamin K. So if you're doing vitamin D, some calcium should be present in the diet, preferably at least a gram daily, at least. I think most people are averaging about 600 milligrams daily, which is woefully inadequate. And I think that may be the reason why we are seeing this, chronic, this epidemic of subclinical hyperparathyroidism and elevated calcitriol. And unfortunately, most doctors don't even test calcitriol. They test your regular vitamin D and they say, oh, it's low, right? And basically they'll see that it's normal and they don't recommend supplementing with. But if they test the calcitriol, then they get even more freaked out and say, oh, no, don't take D3. It's a precursor. It's going to raise it even more. But the real issue is your dietary calcium deficiency, which needs to be corrected. So it's the calcium that is needed, and vitamin D and K are simply the factors ensuring that it will go towards building bones and not in your soft tissues.
beautifully said straight from the source. Can you tell I'm tired? Georgi, any parting words here before we go?
I was going to say that a lot of what Whitney Webb was writing is starting to come to fruition, like these power outages. Have you seen what's going on in Texas?
Yeah, I'm stocking up. People called us crazy, we were talking about this.
Oh, sure.
And so given, granted, they are not cyber attacks, but this is the kind of stuff that was predicted. I don't revel in the stuff going sideways, but I think people were saying this stuff that this was going to happen.
Well, let's see. I mean, we live in interesting times, and they're getting more interesting by the minute.
Okay, so thank you for this, Georgi. Thank you for that. Ray Peat next week, and that should be an exciting episode. Thank you very much. We have an amazing listenership, as I always say. Sincerely appreciate it. We get a huge amount of support on these shows for having such a small audience. So, guys, sincerely appreciate it. We're doing these episodes more often because I sense that people enjoy them. And so, if you guys show support, that makes it easier to jump on here with a tired Danny or a Georgi that has so many things to do every day. So, sincerely appreciate that. Okay, that's it. Thank you, Georgi. Thank you, everybody watching. Talk to you guys soon. Talk to you next week with Mr. Raymond Peat. Peace out, everyone.